meeting of the I'll start over. I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Public Utility District Board of Commissioners today, Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. And begin by taking a roll call of the commissioners to determine if we have a quorum.
Jeff Randall, Commissioner, District 1.
Kenneth Collins, Commissioner, District 2. So we have a quorum. Per the governor's extended proclamation and in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Jefferson PUD is no longer providing an in-person room for meetings of the Board of Commissioners. All meetings will be held remotely via Zoom until otherwise notified by the governor. So I'm pulling up the agenda. We have a brief agenda. Well, it may not be a brief meeting, but the agenda is brief. So the purpose of our getting together today is to enter into a dialogue on the Hadlock sewer project. I will allow public comment at this time and then following the presentation.
Ken, did we want to approve the agenda?
Yes, I think we do.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda.
I'll second it. All in favor of approval of the agenda for this morning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The agenda has been approved. So, Kevin, do you want to take over from here?
I'll take over. So this presentation is being done by the county. Dan was going to do a write-up for the county commissioner. I don't have any of that, so I'm not sure exact order what's going on. I'm going to turn it over to Monty, I think, to start the presentation, but I don't know if it's Monty or who should get the start. So I do apologize. We're kind of running a little different here than we normally do. So Monty, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. You guys hear us okay? Coming in? Okay.
Yes, very good.
Great. Well, I'm Monty Reinders, Public Works Director with Jefferson County. We have Commissioner Heidi Eisenhower here and Project Manager Bob Wheeler working on the sewer project right now. We have a PowerPoint presentation and then we can answer questions. It will start with, I believe, with Heidi and then move over to Bob. So we'll need to be able to share a screen. Can you tell me about how long you're expecting our presentation to last or what time frame we should shoot for here? I just don't want to take more of your time than you were expecting. Is there any?
Well, how much time would you think that you need?
I think when we did this for the city, which was last night, it was about 30 minutes. Is that acceptable?
Absolutely.
Okay, and then questions after that?
Yeah, yep. I was just going to ask Monty if you just want to have us hold questions until after.
Yeah, I think that'd probably be best. Okay, well, we'll get started. If I can share the
You just push the green share
screen. Okay, hang on. I got to push that deal there, don't I? Share screen.
Yeah.
This.
And then you go over to share, the blue share on the right.
Heidi, you should be sitting where I'm at here.
There we are. Very good.
And is that full screen there?
Can you
It
guys
is now.
see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here, and we'll look forward to Commissioner Tupper joining us in a few minutes, it sounds like. I, as the District 2 Commissioner and pretty much a lifetime resident of Hadlock, am very interested in this issue and have been working with both of these guys on this project closely over the last few months, and look forward to the conversation today with you guys and about the potential collaboration with PUD on the sewer. So I'm just going to briefly go over the goals of the meeting today, and then our agenda, and ask if there are any other additions that anyone wants to add. The goals of the meeting are to give you all an update on the project and status of where we're at. As most of you know, this is something we've been working on since 2002. So there's a lot of background and history, but also a lot of activity that's taken place in the last 6 months. And we want to bring everyone, kind of level set the playing field. We're very interested in discussing potential cooperation with the PUD on operating the sewer system. And I know our staff are working on drafting a memorandum of understanding between the PUD and the county for that collaborative work. So we can touch on that. And then we'll go over the next steps for the project and kind of the calendar ahead. So our agenda for today is to give you a short, up to 30-minute presentation. And we have slides to go along with that. And then introduce the idea of the memorandum of understanding, or memorandum of agreement, and see what questions people have about the project, and then talk about next steps. So does anyone have anything else they'd like to see on the agenda or as a goal of this meeting? Commissioners or Kevin? Okay. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Wheeler, our sewer project manager, to give you some history of where we've been at with the sewer, and then what's happened in the recent past since 2018, which is what really enabled us to get the action that we have now going. So, Bob.
Great, thanks, Heidi. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent, okay. So just a little bit on the history from 2008 to 2017. The focus then was a whole wastewater system that would serve the whole UGA within a 20-year time frame. And part of the reason for that was some of the requirements in that time when we were working on that. Those are not the requirements now, but there was a lot of effort put into that. It was a fairly expensive system. We did a lot of public process in that time period. We had public meetings. We had a sewer work group, which was composed of property owners from throughout the whole urban growth area in Port Hadlock. Importantly, the county in the latter part of that time period purchased property for a treatment facility and for disposal of treated wastewater through rapid infiltration to groundwater and ultimately helping recharge Chimacum Creek. But that project itself in that time period really did not move forward because it was very expensive and there was just not the outside funding sources available to the county for this project. And so basically, things kind of just sauntered along for a time period. And then in 2018, property owners in what we're calling now the phase 1 area, and I'll show you a map here in a little bit, which will sort of show the area we're talking about, came to the county and said, hey, isn't there a way we can really get this thing moving along, maybe doing a local improvement district? Can't you relook at everything if we do a smaller area and cut some of the costs, make this thing a little more feasible? So the county said, yep, we'll go ahead and move forward on that. There was a feasibility study that was done that looked at this, and then a facility plan update, which was just approved by Ecology in February this year. And really what was being looked at was downsizing the area that was going to be served, going to a pressure sewer system and going more to a modular MBR, membrane bioreactor type of wastewater treatment. And I'll have a little more on that in a minute. There is grant funding that came through about 1.4 million, a little more than that, for final design. And that's what we are right now, is in final design, pretty close to 60% design right at this point in time. This phase 1 area was construed, even though it was very similar to what was thought about as phase 1 in 2008. The fact that we were going to this pressure sewer system, this modular type of treatment system, allowed us to reduce the costs from that 2008 to 17 effort. Since then, not only have we gotten that $1.4 million, but in this legislative session, there was an appropriation of $20,175,000, which puts this project in a totally different ball game, having that sort of money when our estimates right now are around 24 million. So a total of about 21.5 million in funding is available right now, and we're still applying for other funding beyond that. But it really puts those sorts of resources going to this project start to make this project a real thing. In terms of public processes, we focused over the last year and a half, kind of pre-COVID, on a group of property owners within the phase 1 area to have them give input to the Public Works Department on their thoughts on how we could move this project forward. It didn't focus as much on the broader community out there, but we've done some things recently, a public meeting on April 15th, a newsletter, and we're trying to keep that effort up with another newsletter soon. So next slide.
Why don't we just add, I think, Bob, you personally and with Heidi have been meeting individually with many of the property owners over the last couple of months and continue to do so, because it's really those one-on-one meetings that are the most productive for these phase 1 property owners. So it's been really great to see that moving ahead.
Great. So the system itself, what's proposed? Well, on site on each property would be some tankage. There's an example of a type of tank you might have on the picture on the right, and a grinder pump, which just grinds up any of the solids that might be there. That's really the pumping system for the whole pressure sewer system of these individual pressure grinder pumps that would be installed on each property. The county would own those facilities and would operate and maintain those through whoever we're working with on operating and maintaining the system. But they're an integral part of the overall system. The collection system is pressure sewer. Advantage of that is with a gravity sewer, you have to be very careful on where your other utilities are, water lines, cable, fiber optics. With pressure sewer, you're able to move the lines around a little bit and avoid things. So there's an advantage to that. And the initial cost is less, and those lines are much smaller. I think they range from 2 or 3 inches all the way up to potentially 10 inches, but most of them are much smaller. The treatment system itself will have some treatment parts to it ahead of this modular membrane bioreactor. We've just bid that modular membrane bioreactor and have chosen Ovivo to be the supplier of that equipment. The reason we've done that is not only to get a set price on that, and I think that's guaranteed price for out to sort of 2.5 to 3 years before we need to say you need to build this thing, but it allows us to get access to their engineers and their understanding of their system, which will help us define the overall capital cost, but also importantly, the operation and maintenance cost. And then there's an infiltration and reuse area that will be part of this system. These membrane bioreactors will produce what's called Class A water, which is allowed for reuse. And reuse applies to rapid infiltration and recharge of groundwater and surface water. So in this case, Chimacum Creek.
And I would just add that in 2014, Fort Gamble replaced their aging, failing sewer plant with one of these Ovivo units, and they're producing that Class A effluent with this very similar unit. Nice project. We got to tour it a few years ago, and very interesting. And actually, Kitsap PUD is operating that one for Fort Gamble.
So this next slide, I'm going to start from the right side and go to the left. So on the treatment element, this is the wastewater treatment plant. Again, the membrane bioreactors are brought in on a truck. There'll be 2 of them. The rest of the treatment plant will be in place. A crane will lift these membrane bioreactors in, put them into place, hope all the piping lines up and the electric plug-ins all come together right. And that's part of the treatment system. And then the infiltration and reuse, you can see on the right side. The pressure sewers are the conveyance to get the wastewater to the wastewater treatment plant. And then what we've been saying in the past is that the on-site element, which says private, would be responsibility of the property owners themselves, meaning they would disconnect their septic system, basically mothball that according to what public health is saying they need to do. They'd be putting in these tanks, the grinder pumps, and then pumping into the collection system, the pressure sewer system itself. But we've now been, at least our sort of statement to regulatory agencies and importantly granting agencies or appropriations is that these grinder pumps are such an integral part of the system itself on getting the wastewater to the treatment plant, and the fact that we need easements on each property, that we'd own this equipment, that that should be grant eligible. So we put a question mark here. That's not confirmed. We know some granting agencies won't fund it, but we believe that others will, and we've heard from some others verbally, at least, that that they would be able to fund these tanks and the grinder pumps. So we kind of put this red line in there to show, you know, it's possible that this could be paid for by grants. And that is also a game changer, I think, because those can be expensive depending on individual circumstances. If that's able to be paid for by the collective whole and the appropriations and grant funding, that will definitely reduce costs, capital costs to property owners.
At least for the initial hookups in this first phase.
And the water, there's a picture of raw sewage, plant effluent, and reclaimed water using these types of systems. The Class A effluent, which is important. Ecology was very unlikely to ever authorize discharge to the bay, especially considering that there are other options for discharge of this water. And they prefer this infiltration and recharge. And again, we think an advantage is the augmentation to Chimicum in-stream flows, since water is being taken from wells that are in that watershed. This is returning water to that watershed.
Well, and Ecology has approved that plan and the site that we have selected for that. So, you know, we've already got the approvals to do it. We just have to give them the final design for their approval as well.
A little bit on Growth Management Act, because there's been a fair amount of talk about this. In 2002, the Port Hadlock Irondale UGA was designated. It was designated because that area is characterized by urban growth. It was a countywide decision with extensive input and comment by citizens, Port Townsend agencies and businesses. Then the Growth Hearings Board had basically weighed in on this to say, but you cannot go to urban levels of zoning until such time as you actually have this sewer in place, and only for those areas where sewer serves. So UGAs require urban levels of service for urban level zoning. It's the sum total. Part of that deals with water supply, and Samantha and I have been in discussions on the adequacy of water in the area, and she can talk further. There's the last slide on this issue, but from our discussions and from your water system planning, the capacity you have for urban levels of development in the Port Hadlock area can be supplied by water, and you have the capacity of water to be able to serve that. And for sewer, community drain fields are not allowed. It requires some sort of municipal wastewater service, and there are other things it requires, such as transportation, but really it's the wastewater side of this to be able to get to urban levels of zoning. So that's an important thing. The Jefferson County Comprehensive Plan definitely is incorporated the facility plan, the new facility plan into it. And it's basically saying move forward with getting sewer to the area. Anything else I know either Heidi or Monty on that you want to add to?
I would just add that I was on the planning commission in 1998 when we took all the public comment on the first comprehensive plan under the Growth Management Act. And there was a lot of support for the UGA designation in that. I particularly remember Guy Rudolph coming to every meeting, making comments about that. But this has been a long time coming project for our community.
So the next map, this map shows the proposed phase 1 sewer service area. And this is very similar to the area that was proposed back in 2008 as the initial phase 1 area. You can see that the green are commercial areas within Port Hadlock. That's commercial zoning at the point in time. And this would be the zoning that would be in place when a sewer is put in. Yellow is housing, primarily high, medium density housing, some low density housing. Very few single family homes are in this area right now. There is a mobile home park, which is along Highway 116, just to the east of the library. Law allows them to not necessarily connect, and we've had some initial discussions with the mobile homeowner who's interested in keeping this as a mobile home park, and we need further discussions to see if he's going to be interested in connecting in right away or not. There's some other properties that are either vacant in yellow and in terms of residential, or that have some housing, especially some low-income housing available. You can see it includes the old alcohol plant, the waterfront area, and then the library and the school. And you can see on the south area there, the purple, big purple area largely is composed of the city shops, the jail, sheriff's office, and that type of thing there. You can see where the treatment plant property is located. That's property that the county owns and was purchased specifically for putting in a treatment plant, and the reuse area also, both purchased for this project. You can see that about 59% of the area is commercially zoned, 13% is other, which is largely school, library, or government, and then residential is about 28%. Importantly, that who in phase 1 is going to be connected in, and I do want to say that while that was the phase 1 area I showed, that's not fully determined at this point in time. There's a lot of work to do on finalizing that area, and who will be required to connect is not fully determined. It'll be an iterative process with property owners. Obviously, what they need is to know more on, well, what's it going to cost me to connect, and what's my operation and maintenance costs? What are those going to be? So those are all important things, and we're working hard on getting that, but we can give them estimates right now. We have estimates, you'll see some of those, but they're not fine-tuned as we get further down in the design process, as well as a sewer ordinance and working with the property owners individually. We'll be able to fine-tune what some of these costs are. I included in this slide public outreach efforts to just let you know what we're doing now. In 2008 to 2018, we were doing the work group and public meetings, mostly in the beginning part of that time period. Right now, we had been working pre-COVID with a sewer work group. We had the newsletter. We've been doing some website updates. And getting a lot of good information from the sewer work group when we were working with them. And now we broadened that a little bit to include more information in general. So the whole area out there has a little better knowledge of what is being planned and who's being impacted.
Commissioner Cooper, I see your hand up. We're gonna save questions till after the end of the slide presentation, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that is. I just wanted to check real quick on if you did amended the agenda or not. If that was the case, you're going to ask questions at the end. Thank you.
Yeah,
I apologize for being late. I misread my schedule.
it's okay.
Okay. I included this on septic systems, a design life of 30 years, your required space for the tank, the drain field and reserve drain field on property, which uses a lot of the property that's down in Port Hadlock in this phase 1 area that with sewer will not be needed anymore. So it allows for more dense development and ability for folks to be building where they're not able to be building now. Septic systems need to be inspected, pumped, older systems, prioritize wastewater disposal rather than treatment. And, many of those systems are in that 30-year time frame, if not older than that, out in that particular area. And some water quality information, Jefferson County Public Health has done a number of studies and it indicates that Chimacum Creek is listed as impaired for fecal coliform bacteria. And from some of the studies they've done, they believe that human fecal coliform, some of which come from these septic systems, are part of the reason for that fecal coliform in the system in Chimacum Creek. The sort of process we're in right now, the facility plan has been updated and finalized. The overall final design process is underway. Again, we have the 1.4 million, a little bit more than that for the design. The timing of this is really to be shovel ready for any potential infrastructure money. But as I said earlier, we already have $21.5 million of appropriations for this project. The modular MBR, I mentioned the reasons why we moved forward with bidding that now. We talked about the location of the treatment plant itself. Moving forward, the pressure sewers, I might mention that it's always fun trying to locate anything in the state highway right of way. We've been in good discussions with the state highway department to work on locations where we can put in pressure sewers. And I think we've already talked enough about the tank and grinder pump and connection of the on-site piping into the system.
I'd just add that the PUD staff has been very helpful in identifying where existing PUD water lines are in county roads and state right-of-ways, and continues to work with Bob on that issue. So we really appreciate the effort PUD has contributed already to help us out with the design on the sewer collection system.
For sure, that's been very important for sure. It's important to know that the cost estimates other than the design right now are planning level estimates. The design is under contract for the 1.4 million. And cost refinements are ongoing with the design efforts. And those are important numbers that we need to get on refining those so that the property owners have a much better idea of what this might cost them for both connecting to the sewer system as well as for operation and maintenance. We're looking for design completion as part of that, and an operation and maintenance agreements also. And all of this will be getting more and more information and better information as we move forward in terms of costs. The planning level estimates that we have right at this point in time, you can see that the pressurized sewer system is a bit over $7 million on our estimate. The treatment system itself and recharge is about $11.5 million for 19 million, a little over that. On-site grinder pump and side sewer for 356 ERUs, equivalent residential units is what that stands for. Looking at a little over $4 million. The number of ERUs came from the PUD. Again, another cooperative thing and helping us out in terms of what they have in the phase 1 area for the number of equivalent residential units that they're serving in that area. So the estimated initial system cost for phase 1's close to $24 million. We've received this $1.4 million from the state for the final design, and we have about 22 million left that needs to be funded. And this table kind of summarizes where we stand now. So if you look at final design, we have the 1.4 million, and that's again into our final design contract amount. We don't need to get additional monies for the final design itself. The construction then ends up being a little over 22 million at this planning level estimate. We just got this appropriation for 20,175,000, which leaves us about $2 million remaining. The potential sources for that is there additional federal funding, state funding, local and property owners. And as I mentioned earlier, we are still working on getting funding from those entities. Then quickly, the grants and appropriations are very key to us. If we have any debt service on loans, if any loan funding is necessary for the project, that could come from the county public infrastructure funds or from connection fees. The local improvement district idea is still there. There may be some agencies, if we get additional funding, that will require us to do a local improvement district. And there's some advantages to local improvement districts, because if you get one approved, then that ends up being the area that can be included in the sewer area. But they are very prescribed, time-consuming processes. They're very costly to form. And so we are looking at potentially not needing a local improvement district at this point. But I don't want to say never. But that's at least how we are looking at it at this point in time. I want to emphasize that property owners outside of the phase 1 service area will not pay for a capital cost or connection or for operations and maintenance. Those are not costs that will accrue to them in any way, shape, or form. I think there's been some misunderstanding on that. Will only be those people that are benefiting from the sewer system itself in a direct fashion, because they will be connected to it, or they are within the phase 1 area. A couple more slides. The estimate of the facility plan is around $91 per ERU per month. That's based on 356 ERUs at startup. Again, those 356 ERUs were from the PUD water records. And operation maintenance includes labor, power, chemicals, the lab testing, solids handling, disposal, parts replacement, reserve, and emergency reserve, and of course, administrative costs, billing, insurance, legal, etc. But that's an estimate right now, and the fact that we now have the MBR folks on board, we will start to be able to refine that number even now. And as design moves forward, we hope to have a refined figure on that. That number is not out of whack with other entities that are starting up new wastewater systems, though.
Well, I think that's the area that really working with the PUD on the potential to do the billing for the customers on this project and operate the system, working closely with the PUD to really nail down what those costs are going to be. Obviously, it's going to be a lot more efficient for an existing utility like the PUD to provide that service than for the county to start up its own utility operation. So we're really excited about the potential to work with the PUD on this project. And I think through that process is where we'll really be able to hone in on that monthly cost. The monthly cost for this project, the $91 per ERU, there's no expectation that any debt service is going to be included in the monthly bill. It's strictly operations, maintenance, administration, and establishing a reserve fund. So that's what's included in the monthly bill.
So this is an important slide to give you a little bit of an idea on the timing. So the plan is to complete final design with ecology approval around September of 2022. We'll have much better idea on the cost at that point in time. We will, moving forward with cooperation with the PUD and the very likely potential that the PUD will be actively involved in operation. We'd like to share 60, 90, and 100% design time periods with staff so they have a chance to look at what's being designed so they, one, become knowledgeable of what's going to be coming forward, and then can have input into that, those design time periods. Complete permitting, there's State Environmental Policy Act, National Environmental Policy Act, cultural resources and other items like that. We hope to complete those by July of 2022. And Monty's been working with a consultant on a contract for doing that. Construction, the plan is to start in December of 2022 with the completion of construction of the system by sometime between August and December of 2024. You can see the next bullet point there is the 20.175 million appropriation. It's a little unclear right now if it has to be committed to be spent before that December 2024, or if it has to be spent. Frankly, Department of Commerce, where that appropriation money is going to come forward through, and it's some of the COVID relief bill funding from the federal government. The federal government hasn't given Commerce their requirements on any of this, and Commerce hasn't put together their requirements. We've been in touch with them to be on top of this because that's important. But right now we are working towards a schedule that has completion of construction by December 2024, and that might modify based on what we hear. The sewer ordinance, which will be very key in terms of who will be required to connect into the sewer system sometime in the early 2023 time period. That's a public process, and will control who and when for connecting, but it'll have a number of other items in it. And then private property agreements, easements, and commitments to tie into the system, July 2022 through July 23. And I think our last slide of substance is just additional comments. And I don't know if Samantha, by the way, I'm 3 minutes over if I finish here, wants to talk about the PUD's information on the supply of water for the Port Hadlock UGA, but that's a question that's been out there. Again, she indicated to us that she was pretty comfortable with the supply incapacity that you have for that area, but she can speak more to the details of that. And then the potential for an interlocal agreement or MOU with the PUD to sort of formalize that relationship beyond the existing agreements that are there for work specifically and cooperation specifically on the sewer system. And I think that's the end of the slides. The last slide is just a thank you slide. So anything additional from anybody here, or should we open to questions or
Did
comments?
you want to have any more discussion on the water supply issue?
Samantha, do you want to say anything on the water supply?
Sure. I didn't want to stop the wrap up. So yes. So I guess the punchline is that we currently have a little over 5,000 ERU for our entire Quimper system, and our system capacity can be about 9,700 ERU. And as Bob mentioned during the presentation, we currently serve 352 ERU within the Hadlock area, and they would go up to about 105. So it would be about 150 additional ERU, which we have we could double the capacity. Well, pretty close to double the capacity in our Quimper system before we reach our water right capability. So we have adequate, I guess the real punchline is we have adequate water for this project moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Samantha.
Thanks, Samantha. With that, I think we could open it up to questions that anybody might have and discussion, and then talk a little bit about next steps.
Maybe stop sharing then the all the people will show up.
So Dan, you had your hand up earlier.
If you just stop share.
Where do I do that?
Down on the red, right below
Red.
that.
Yeah. There.
Dan, do you still have a question?
Well, I just want to catch up real quick. Ken, did we amend the agenda at all?
No.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that nothing else had been added. Again, apologies for showing up late. I misread my schedule. So I guess I'll start out with a question. I followed this quite closely for quite a while, and I appreciate Heidi's reference to Guy Rudolph. He was my scout leader back in about 1971, and he was talking about this then. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see if we can kind of bring this thing to some closure here in the near future. Appreciate all of county staff's work on this. So my first question really is, because of the funding, it seems that you're secured or feel confident that you're securing. That has somewhat exceeded your expectations, hasn't it? And if it has, does it make sense? And I know you're on a tight schedule for finishing your design and starting on construction with, about this time next year. Is there some talk now maybe about bringing more residential areas into this, because maybe it would be cheaper to do it now? I guess that's kind of the ultimate question. Thank you.
I appreciate what you're saying, Commissioner, but I don't think we have the capacity at this time, either time-wise or funding-wise, to expand the phase one service area at this time. There is some residential in there, and even some of the commercial. I mean, the old alcohol plant is providing a lot of housing, even though it's shown as commercial property. And of course, there's the area behind the county shop where there's some existing housing that could expand. The garden court apartments potentially, although I can't speak for property owners and say what they're going to do, but hopefully, and some of the vacant property that's zoned residential, hopefully there will be a significant opportunity for some housing in this first phase. But
Commissioner Randall?
I think you're muted.
Thank you. Got the hand lowered, but I forgot to unmute. Excellent presentation. Thank you for making it so tight and concise. I can see you guys have been through this before. And Bob, it's really interesting to have you have been involved in this for so long. I think, when I first met you, you were with the city and I was with the city, and this UGA stuff was still fresh and evolving. So it's been really interesting to see this progress. And first of all, I just like to say I'm really pleased with how you seem to be trying to lock in costs, and you seem to be trying to finish the design, because we're not going to get to construction and locking in costs until we stop making it a moving target. We finish and say, this is it, this is what we're doing. And I'm really pleased to hear how it sounds like you're really trying to tie that up so we can get to the building part. And the concern I had was just over time, how the costs keep going up on this. And as I hear you talk about the logistics of trying to actually figure out where's a pipe going to go in the ground, and whose jurisdiction is that, and what's in the ground, and what that's going to involve, I think that really answers the question of why we're not looking at a gravity sewer. The gravity sewers really need to go in early on in the development of a community. And if they don't, it's really hard at this point to do it. So it seems like this is probably the only solution that would work. And thank goodness it exists, that we even have this kind of technology that will work. So this is all new information for me, and I'm really glad to hear the stage it's at. So I'll start with my question, and maybe what we can do is just kind of keep going around the commissioners with questions until we feel like we've kind of gotten our answers, because I have a lot of questions. But I heard you say PUD billing assistance is kind of what's being talked about, and maybe you said it and I didn't hear it, but did you talk about operation and maintenance too, or is that still open about who would actually operate and maintain the system?
We would like to work with the PUD on the operation and maintenance of this system as well, if the PUD is agreeable to that. Definitely. We know that you currently don't have a wastewater treatment plant operator on staff, but we want to work with you on this because you're right here, and you know, there needs to be not only staff available to, you know, work on the treatment plant, I mean, operate the treatment plant, but also, you know, address issues with grinder pumps, power outages, and other things that happen out in the community. And there has to be staff in the community close by able to do these activities. And we think that the PUD is, you know, well positioned to do that. So.
Okay, this is kind of a follow-up question on that. So when you start dicing this, is it thought that the county would maintain ownership of the actual equipment and facilities and have some sort of operating agreement with the PUD?
That seems like the logical way right now, but I think, you know, anything's possible down the road or whatever. Certainly we're not looking to offload, you know, debt onto the PUD or anything like that, so yeah, I mean, I think what you described there is probably the first choice, but we can talk about all alternatives.
Okay, thank you.
This might be a good place to mention that Kitsap PUD operates a system in Kitsap County. So they're a good local resource for modeling how this kind of collaboration could work.
Right. And they seem to get through that startup process pretty quickly with hiring staff and making it happen, just because of the nature of these build and design and ship plants. So they've had lots of good things to say about it. I'll stop there.
Yeah.
I have a question about one of the slides that you showed that had 3 different water samples. And it wasn't clear to me whether the pristine water in the jar to the right is what's going to be produced by the system, or whether it's the slightly cloudy water in the middle. So could you please clarify?
I can do that. It is the water bottle on the far right. This plant with these MBR systems are classified as producing Class A water. And Class A water is such that means reclaimed water that at a minimum is at all times oxidized, coagulated, filtered, disinfected wastewater. Wastewater shall be considered adequately disinfected, and then it goes into some details on that. But and it's water that's even encouraged by ecology, and we've been in discussions with them. They're excited about what we are proposing here for being able to reuse this water. So it is a very it's basically the top of the line of wastewater treatment plants in terms of the effluent that comes out of that. Port Townsend's treatment plant is only a secondary treatment plant. It does not produce this level of wastewater treatment. And that was just because that's what those requirements were back when that plant was built. Brightwater, which is a huge wastewater treatment plant with King County, has membrane filters that they are using. So they've gone to that, and they are discharging out to saltwater. But I think that the type of treatment technology we're using is a state of the art, frankly. But when I say state of the art, it's not experimental. There's a lot of these types of plants. And we gave an example of one that's very, very similar to what we're going to be constructing here just over in Port Campbell in Kitsap County.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Tupper.
So for Bob and Monty, so maybe a little more detail on the Commissioner Collins asked about the clarity of the water. So the system, does it gravity feedback into the aquifer? Is it pressure injected through some sort of wells? Maybe you could give a little detail on that. And for Commissioner Eisenhower, she could maybe touch a little bit, because Jeff was interested on the cost of maybe how the PIF fund moving forward, what kind of money we might be looking at.
Sorry, Bob. I mean, it infiltrates via gravity. It's not pressurized into the ground or anything. It's discharged into a rapid rate infiltration pond. We doubt you'll ever see much water in it because it is rapid rate infiltration. It might be something like that stormwater pond out off the end of the runway there, which you rarely see water in. But anyway, it's applied at the surface in a basin, and then it disappears into the ground. And we've done multi-year studies of that site with hydrogeologists and ecology and all the wells, monitoring wells and all this kind of stuff to test that site to ensure that it will work, not just for phase one, but even for some of the additional phases that could occur in the future if property owners desire to see the sewer expand. To your second question about PIF, we don't have any additional PIF funds, targeted at this time. But if, for example, we were to acquire another grant to close the funding gap, and it had a 20% match, say, then PIF funds might be a good source of local match where we could leverage PIF 5, 6, or 8 to 1, whatever, to free up some additional federal or state money.
And I would just add on PIF that at the board meeting last week, there was a proposal brought to the committee to cap the amount of PIF funds given, instead of making it a 50% for the Hadlock sewer, to cap it at $240,000 a year. So that would make more money available above that 240 for other project applicants in the community. And it seemed like there was support for that adjustment to the PIF program. And PIF runs through 2032 currently.
And Commissioner Dean worked hard the last couple legislative sessions on trying to work with Steve Theringer to get that legislation extended for another 20 years or 22 years to get it so it doesn't sunset until 2054, so that organizations like ours or the PUD or the city would have the ability to, again, reap the rewards of the PIF program, or potentially, bond for future, for current projects that could be paid off over time in the future. So I'm sure we'll be working on that legislation again in the next session, and probably reaching out to the PUD and Port and City for support of extending that so that it doesn't sunset in 2032 like it currently is expected to. I mean, that's existing state tax money that's going to get collected one way or the other. It's just, does some of that get returned to Jefferson County for infrastructure needs, or does the state keep it all for the things the state's going to do with that money? So I think it's wise for us to all support the 0.09 program, as it's called, to continue beyond 2032.
So it might be a bit premature to ask what the cost will be to the individual businesses in terms of hooking up, but how much of the expense for installation of the grinder pump tank and any other infrastructure is likely to be borne by the business? And since the plan is to have it either owned by the county or the PUD, what percentage might be assigned then to either governmental agency?
It's premature to put out specific numbers, because we all know what happens when you do that. It becomes law. There were estimates in the sewer facility plan, none of which ever envisioned getting $21 million in grant funding. We had estimates for up to $13 million of grant funding, and that had connection costs of
12.7.
Well, plus the on-site.
Plus the
So it was, all up, it was about, $25,000 per ERU. Now with state funding and other grants we're applying for, making up the preponderance of the funding needed, for the project, we see those numbers coming, way down. It's not going to be free. There are going to be costs to the property owners, and we know that we need to get that information nailed down. It's just still a little bit early to put out hard numbers for that until we have a little bit more information with the new funding scenario available and the design work that's going on. I think that it's a question we want to be answering in the next 6 to 8 months for sure. And we'll put out some ranges as we get closer to this, but it's something we got to keep working on.
I just add a footnote to that. Of course, and this is probably obvious, but each property is going to be different. I mean, there's no one property that's going to be the same as any other. So that cost would be different. And a real factor here, and we mentioned it in the slideshow, is that it depends so much on what a property owner might have to pay if we're able to pay through the appropriations or funding for the grinder pump itself and the tank. And our argument is they are so integral to the system that we think they should be eligible, but we don't really know right now. And we may not know for a little bit of time here on the 20 million, if that's going to have as eligible the tanks themselves and the the grinder pumps themselves. So that's a key question. That's another reason we don't want to necessarily answer it. We're sort of hinting that that's a potential, but we don't know.
So in other words, the allocation of costs is going to be grant dependent to a considerable extent. And I hear what you're saying, that this is not the time to come out with any dollar figures. And at this point, you can't really fairly determine who is going to be responsible to pay for what, whether the actual installation costs or the costs of any of the equipment. That remains to be determined. Okay, thank you. I think Commissioner Tupper was first and then Commissioner Randall.
Thanks, Ken. So let's assume a good case scenario here, and you're meeting your construction beginning in September of 2022. So we're experiencing supply chain issues, and I'm sure you're aware of that as well. With this 20 million that you have, are you considering starting to stockpile like HDPT pipe or the grinder pumps or, the cisterns or tanks or whatever in preparation for that? Can that money be used towards kind of getting the materials now so that you're ready to go in 2022 so that you're not really behind the 8 ball? Because everybody else out there is going to have access to money and have projects, they're going to be moving probably pretty fast. So I'm just wondering what your plan is as you look forward with your permitting and getting people signed on as to how that's all going to mesh. And one other thing is maybe you guys could also touch a little bit, getting back to PIF a little bit, on the debt that already exists, that pay down on that debt, what those timelines were and how much that money was exactly that's still owed on that debt service.
Well, your points about material availability and costs pressures are real. We have not made any plans to stockpile materials at this point. Don't even know if you could do that with this money. We have design work that still needs to be done to even know what materials those would be. Our engineering firm had an HDPE project which bid out in Portland and was way more money than it should have been. So they had to go back and rebid it with PVC instead, which brought the price down significantly. So, I mean, there's a lot of questions out there to be answered still about this bidding climate. It's unfortunate with, when you get these stimulus funds like this, that there's often these such tight spending deadlines that it forces everyone into this boom and bust cycle, where everyone gets really busy for 3 years, or they just start doing projects that are easy to do, like paving, because that's the only thing you can do that fast. We're struggling with some of those issues. I mean, we went from having enough money to do the design, answer these questions that are being asked, create an ordinance in preparation for construction, to suddenly having construction money. And we're trying to catch up with that. We're trying to hire full-time project management staff right now to work on this project. So, it's the issues you're bringing up, Commissioner, are real, and they're things that we're having to deal with here. To your point about PIF, PIF is paying off bonds and loans for work that was done up through 2013. It's all going to retire debt on past deliverables that included purchase of all the property for this project, prior design work, studies like the hydrogeologic study I mentioned, sewer facility planning, and all the things that got this project to the point where we could even entertain asking for $20 million and then getting $20 million, being in that position. So it was, money well spent, and it's positioned us to get this project that's been going on for 20 years to this point where we've finally gotten, some real funding to be able to build something with it.
And to answer the debt retirement part of that question, Administrator McCauley, in his flat rate model for going forward on PIF, has paying off that, retiring that debt in the next 12 years with that $240,000 a year allocation of PIF money. So that if we go that route, that will just retire the debt. There will not be extra money coming from PIF for the sewer, other than this $240,000 that will be used to retire the debt.
That's correct.
Does that answer that question, Dan? Okay.
Commissioner Randall?
Yeah, I think it's my turn. So could you guys talk a little bit about the other permits? You mentioned Department of Ecology, final design approval, but could you talk about whether SEPA is required, or any other permits that are needed before this thing gets built? And then connected to that, you mentioned that the public participation so far has pretty much been focused on the phase one property owners, making sure they're on board, they understand the costs and the implications. And it sounds like you're starting now to reach out to the broader community, to folks who are not necessarily going to be in the project, but probably have questions about it, or maybe could be in it later. So I guess some of the questions that come up for me, this is like going to be the biggest thing that's happened in Hadlock in a long time. And I think people need to know why we're doing what's being proposed to be done, why we're not doing something else. For example, gravity sewer, who's going to be served, who's not. And I'm just kind of curious if you could talk both about the remaining permits and then your approach to the public involvement.
So the permits, there was a lot of work done on the permitting back in the 2013 timeframe. And most of the work was completed, but that's been 8 years. So we'll have to redo SEPA. We may have to do NEPA, depending on the flavor of the funding. We don't need any Army Corps permits. We'll have to, we did the cultural resources study back in 2012. We'll have to redo that, and the governor's got a new cultural resources executive order you're probably aware of, 05, that replaced 0505. So we'll have to do that. But again, being in roadway prisms, we don't anticipate and didn't encounter a lot of challenges with that back when we did it before. No wetlands impacts, just some wetland buffer impacts. We have a mitigation plan for that was already developed. So permitting's well on its way, and but we have to, redo some of it, and we're just starting that work right now. The second question, public outreach, maybe Bob can speak to. There was community-wide, UGA-wide, significant community outreach during the development of the original sewer facility plan. That process went from 2005 to 2008. Now, granted, that's been over 12 years, but there was, again, well, and prior to that, of course, when the urban growth area was designated and Heidi was part of that work with the Planning Commission, there were extensive public meetings and outreach related to that. So yeah, we need to get more information out there, but I mean, we're not recontemplating whether it should be a UGA, whether there should be a sewer. These are decisions that were made 15, 20 years ago, and we're not going back. The style of sewer, back when the sewer facility plan was done in 2000, completed in 2008, pressure sewers were definitely on the table back then, but since, as Bob mentioned in the presentation, the focus at the time was on a 20-year plan to sewer the whole UGA. The gravity sewer, in theory, made a little bit more sense in the long term. I'm not sure that really, it was pretty close cost-wise. But I mean, the challenges that you mentioned, Jeff, of putting gravity sewer in last, were always going to be there. And it is possible to sewer the larger UGA with the pressurized system for an equivalent cost. There's pros and cons of both systems. But this is the only way we're going to get it done, is with this pressurized system. And the infrastructure we're putting in is sized to accommodate future expansion and growth, not just, the pipe sizing isn't just for phase one. We're not going to have to rip the pipes out of the ground when Rhodey Drive comes on in the future. If Rhodey Drive property owners want to and start over, the pipes are there and can handle the flows. And the modular sewer treatment plant is set up to have additional units added on to it without having to, start over from scratch and throw away old work and things like that. So it seems like a pretty good system to give us a lot of flexibility depending on what happens in the future.
Well, and the reason I brought up the public outreach stuff wasn't to say, oh, we need to go back and start over. It was because I've just been stopped and asked by people who live in Hadlock, hey, the sewer thing's getting funded. Does that mean I'm going to have to pay to disconnect my house? And my answers have been, no, that's not what this is intended for. And I think there has been a lot of good work. And I think this is an opportunity to let folks know, guess what? All that work that's been done, it's now culminating and we're moving ahead and things are starting to happen. And this is the first part of what's going to happen. And here's who's intended to be served. And if you're in this other category, this is your situation. If you have an on-site septic, you're still responsible for maintaining your on-site septic. And there might even be an opportunity, because I don't even know what the county goes through in terms of finding septics that are failing. This might be an opportunity to do a little more education on your responsibilities of owning a septic system and finding out if it's failing and letting people know what the resources are to replace and fix that. Like I know Craft 3 works with the county to provide loans for on-site septic system replacement. So I think this whole thing is not just moving forward for the Hadlock area with this phase one wastewater stuff, but it's an opportunity to explain to people who aren't going to be affected by this right now, what their responsibilities are and why we're doing this. It's lots of reasons. It's to give the area a way forward for development and housing and so forth. And so that Hadlock can become something else and not be stuck in limbo land, and it's to protect the water. So there's lots of reasons for this. And it's not to say start over with your public outreach. It's kind of an evolution of it and letting folks know where things are going. To me, it's good news. It's lots of good news to share.
Hey, Jeff, I'd just add that in terms of a little more on what we have been trying to do. So we have the sewer work group that we were meeting with on a regular basis. That was largely property owners within the phase one area and some agencies there also. And so we were really trying to get some ideas and thoughts from them on kind of how this thing proceeded, but it wasn't really broadly open to others outside of those property owners. Additionally, we've been meeting, Heidi and I in particular, but Monty and I have had a few meetings one-on-one with both folks who are property owners, but also some folks that are outside the area that have expressed concerns about the sewer system. So we've been doing some of that and are continuing that. So I think that's going to help get the information out there and kind of get rid of the rumor mill of what this is or isn't. Two, we did put out in March a very thorough newsletter that really did, I think, do a good job of explaining what this project is, what it isn't, kind of where it is, what its status is, what its time period is. So that came out then. We're looking to update and come out with another newsletter because that newsletter was before we knew we'd gotten to 20 million. So we're going to plan to put something out hopefully in July. We had the April 15th meeting of which we had over 60 people attend that open meeting sponsored by the commissioners, county commissioners. And I don't know how many chat box questions and comments we had, but we basically responded to each one of those questions and comments and sent that out also, both to people who had signed up for our email list as well as then on our website itself. We are trying to update the website right now and get some more current information in there. And that will get information out more broadly also. So, we are trying to take all of those steps to get out to the broader community. We knew we fell behind, but you have a public works director here who was working, has his day job and was working on this also. I'm only part-time. I am actually retired, but oh well, so much for that. I decided to come in and help on this thing. So, but I can only be part-time. And again, the county's looking at hiring some more management into the system. When you don't manage a $24 million project with less than one FTE, I'm managing it. So we're
the HR consultant just told me the job got posted
okay.
in the last couple days.
So we're trying to get our own internal resources up so we can be more proactive in getting the word out. But even with the resources that we have, we are spot on. I think your point's well taken. We do need to get to that larger community, and we are working hard to try to do that.
So I'm realizing there are new names to me on this Zoom room. Can we put your email in the chat? Are you collecting the email addresses for the email list?
Yeah, they can come to, people can get to me if you want to be on our email list. You can.
Monty, can you put Bob's email in the chat?
We can do that.
You have command control.
So if people want to go to the chat, you can get my contact information.
Commissioner Tupper.
Down there too.
Yeah, so great conversation. That was one of the things I had on my list here too, was, what kind of public involvement, outreach, messaging that was, going to be in play beyond what was already there. I've attended quite a few of the working groups meetings. My next question, it falls in line again, a little bit under that context, but and a little bit under the one that I asked earlier about materials, and that's going to be contractors. Will this be a sealed bid process? I'll ask Monty to get out his crystal ball here a little bit. And will it require multiple contractors? Or are you thinking this would be one large contractor? Because I know we have contractors in the county that can do this work. But again, this is part of this outreach. Materials are going to be hard to come by. Contractors could be even harder. So it'd be nice to stay local if we can, the earlier we can kind of determine things, the better off it'll be maybe for those people to, figure out schedules and whether or not they're going to be able to bid, because the bidding process, if you could elaborate a little bit more on how your bidding process is going to work on this going forward, that might be a little helpful for people who listen to the audio or have questions in the construction side of things, how that process is going to work. So you're not having to give away anything that you're not supposed to at this point. Obviously when you're talking about projects, you can't speak to individuals too much, without acting like you're being preferential. So what's the outreach there on the construction side of things for contractors?
Thanks, Commissioner. I'm trying to type here at the same time.
Thanks, Monty.
Yeah, the contracting world is going to be tight, just like the materials world. We're going to have to follow normal procurement protocol. I mean, that's what made bidding the MBR so challenging, because that was such a difficult thing to write specs for that wasn't, basically saying it must have, this manufacturer's name on the side of it or something. I mean, these are challenging to meet. And and the funding we've received will have its own set of requirements. I've had some of the same thoughts you have about splitting it into several contracts, especially if we can get some of the work started in advance of maybe some of the other work. So some of the earthwork potentially could be done as a separate contract, preparing the site and things like that, even though maybe we're not quite there with ready to start digging up the highways and putting lines in. So I mean, those are all possibilities. I would love to see local contractors get a piece of this. I know even when some of the large projects have been done around here, like the city's water treatment plant, which went to a large contractor not from this area, that local contractors were subs on that, particularly earthwork. So they still had a good opportunity to get a piece of that work. I mean, the bridge project that is out there, going between Indian Island and Maristone, obviously Seaton Construction got a big piece of that, even though they weren't the general on it. So, remains to be seen, but all good points, Commissioner.
So are there members of the PUD staff who have questions or comments at this point? Commissioner Randall?
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the meeting that you had with the city and maybe just give a synopsis of the concerns and issues raised in terms of us as city, county, PUD, with a big project like this going on. Are there concerns that came up from the city that we should be aware of?
No, I didn't hear anything specifically that I would label as a concern. I think they had some, questions about the project and what it's intended to accomplish and who it's going to serve, and, interest in the housing component of it, certainly. Heidi, you were listening. I know you weren't presenting. Did you have a perception there, Bob?
No, I mean, there were questions, but I didn't hear specific concerns. I mean, there were questions about water availability, which we just heard from Samantha on. There was questions about PIF, and we shared the same information there that we're sharing with you guys. There was a little bit of a couple questions and a little bit of discussion about future phases. How can we crystal ball on future phases? Where would the future phases be? And both Bob and myself in reaching out to individuals in the community have generated other folks reaching out to us asking, can I talk to you about the sewer? Am I in the phase 1 boundary? So there's actually, I'm hearing quite a bit from constituents in District 2 people who are not within the phase one boundary who are interested in the sewer. So, but it's interesting because the people I've heard from are in geographically diverse areas. So it isn't like I can say to you now, I've heard from 12 people and that's our logical phase two next step. But in the past, the phases, the second phase was imagined to be Rhodey Drive. And then the residential areas north of the current phase one in Hadlock and Irondale were phases 3 and 4. So we don't know what our next phases will be, but that was quite a bit of the discussion last night. And a little bit of just history, you know, talking about Raya 17 water issues and Guy Rudolph and the Planning Commission. I mean, you know, we all know that Mayor Sandoval has a long and deep history in the community, and she was just kind of reminding us of some of the conversations that had happened earlier, but none of these were concerns, they were just questions.
Great, thank you. And I guess one of the things I'm hearing too, that we probably as a PUD need to keep in the front of our minds is sharing information on water availability, because that's our area, and just to make sure folks know what we can provide. And when we're talking about sewer, here's the irony: the people are already using the water. It's not, I mean, this isn't really talking about new water necessarily. This is talking about how we're treating the water that's coming out of the place. So thank you.
Other questions? Not seeing any hands or being aware of anyone else who has a question. Then I want to thank the planning folks, Monty, Bob, Heidi, for spending this time with us. This has been very informative. And Commissioner Tupper, you have a hand raised.
Yeah, while we still have county staff, I see there are a couple people from the public. If you want to give them 3 minutes, I don't know what was discussed before I came on, but since they're on, if there's anyone from the public, we might let them ask a question or two.
We've got time for that. So if there are questions from anyone who's listening in, we'd be happy to spend a few minutes on them. I do want to do a quick wrap up at the end, but let's do that after we see if there's any questions from Cammie, Joel, Don, Craig, Zach, Paula, Scott, Melanie. Any of you have questions? I see Don McDaniel had a hand raised.
Oh, no, I had a thumb raised.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So this is Jeff. Just one more thing for Kevin and Will. I think, you know, because we send out a newsletter that goes to every customer in Jefferson County, I think it would be useful at some point, once we feel like, you know, and the commissioners haven't really, I mean, this meeting was to precede us talking more about, between ourselves, about the PUD's role. So this has been fantastic. And I've attended several of the meetings outside of this, but I really appreciate the opportunity to hear the whole thing again, the latest update, and for us to ask you questions all together. But I'm just thinking that it's at some appropriate time, probably in the not too distant future, that we could use our own public outreach methods to let our customers know what we're anticipating our involvement could be. And again, it's helpful, I think, for people to hear multiple times what something is and what something is not. So I think we have resources that we can use to help us do outreach too, but we have to talk about that. Thank you.
It's a great idea, Jeff.
Yeah, I really appreciate that for sure.
I got my PUD newsletter and my day planner. I carry it with me everywhere. So if there aren't any other questions, maybe we'll just kind of wrap up with next steps. Does that work for everyone?
Yes, please.
So it seems like what we need to do next is have our staff work together on developing the MOU, which is in draft form now, for consideration by both the Board of County Commissioners and the PUD commissioners. And I know we're looking to move this project along, so I think we're trying to do that in fairly short order. So can we leave it to staff to get that on the calendar, Kevin and Monty, and I think Samantha and Bob? Is that where okay, great.
And we're not looking for the PUD to fund this work. I mean, provide some staff time certainly, but if we need to bring in external resources to help answer questions or something, we'll fund that through the sewer fund to get that work done, working with the PUD. So other than some of your staff time, we're not looking beyond that at this point. So
anything else? Oh, Dan, I see Dan's hand up.
Yeah, again, hopefully I didn't miss this. I know we talked a little bit about the current funding. Are you actually targeting or looking at any other particular grants right now? I mean, I realize legislation is still transpiring in Washington, D.C., and I don't know what's happening with the state funding, if the 20 million was all that was available to you. Maybe, is there anything you're looking at that grant writing help on, or what kind of associated work needs to be done to help with a grant?
So we have a request in with Senator Murray and Senator Cantwell right now for a little over $2 million that we're trying to add to our current funding picture. We're also looking at an Economic Development Administration, EDA, grant that's going to be coming up soon as a possibility as well. And beyond that, if we find that, we even need additional funding because of the cost escalation that you were mentioning, or other factors, we might be looking at Department of Ecology, Clean Water, revolving fund, grant loan program. But we aren't eligible for that until we complete the design. So we're going to continue certainly the funding search, and I'm sure the PUD can be a helpful partner in that some way to support that as you get more and more involved in this project with us.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that we didn't talk about today that I think's been an important point in our one-on-one meetings with phase one property owners is that likely we'll incentivize early hookup to the system, and that may be something that we consider in our work with you on setting rates and stuff like that. But a good example that we've been using is the Carlsberg one. Do you want to share what they did there, Bob?
Yeah, in Carlsberg, they have a system. They didn't have to build a sewage treatment plant itself, but basically piping and connections, largely from an industrial business area, and connecting it to the Squims sewage treatment plant. And from my understanding, they were charging, because they were funding theirs, I think, largely through their PIF funds that they have, the public infrastructure funding that Clallam County had. They, our understanding was that charged about $500 per hookup for the first year for folks. So it was quite an incentive to hook up. Then went to $1,500 the second year. And then the third year, what we've heard is they went to about $8,000. So there was quite the incentive in the first year, pretty good incentive in the second year, and then it increased a lot. And I think that they had great participation by all those people in the area that they were really focused on trying to serve, because the incentive was so great. And even though they were all on septic tank leach field systems, they all moved away from those and were willing to pay the operation and maintenance cost. I offhand don't know what they were paying operation and maintenance wise. But
They're at around $80 an ERU per month over there. Again, they hooked into an existing system that's got the economies of scale of SQUIM. So they had that going for them. They had about a $10 million construction project all up. That was more like a $14 million project. They funded that through a Public Works Trust Fund loan that they're repaying that debt with their PIF money. They call it the Opportunity Fund over there. Interestingly, they set aside about $500,000 a year out of their PIF program, which at the time was about 50%. But as the PIF revenues have increased and that amount has stayed flat, it's progressively become a smaller and smaller percentage. They're probably down around 38% of their PIF money now going to the sewer to retire that debt. Like most things, Clallam County seems to be 2.5 to 3 times bigger than we are, whether it's population, the size of their road fund revenues, or their 0.09 PIF program. It's about 3 times the size of what it is in Jefferson County because they have the larger population and a lot of commercial already going on out in the county. And then of course, the Port Angeles SQUIM, all the sales tax coming in through there. So, but just a little history about their project. It's kind of interesting. They completed that about 3 years ago. And we're fortunate to already have a treatment plant that they could connect to right next door.
Commissioner Tupper? You're
Oh,
muted,
sorry.
Dan.
Nope, I didn't take my hand down, so go. Nope, nothing, Ken. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Again, thank you all for participating in this meeting, which was very informative, and I think it's going to lay the groundwork for several meetings going forward and increase cooperation between the county and the PUD. Clearly, Jefferson PUD has a significant role to play, and we look forward to working with you. So with the absence of any additional questions or comments, I will call the meeting adjourned unless there are major objections.
Thanks, everyone. We'll look forward to
Thank
working
you.
with you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Presentation.
Great presentation.
Yeah.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Kevin.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Commissioner, county staff. Great job.